Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're back with another runner from Western Pennsylvania. It was a track star in cross country in high school and college, competed at high levels, on to Olympic trials. Let's get to know today on the podcast, running in the 70s, Dan Cunkleman. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Matt.
Did you ever have a nickname besides Kunks?
Kunkle Monster.
All right.
That was used a few times.
Let's introduce you by going back in the earliest athletic career you remember. When do you first recall getting involved in any kind of competitive sports, and what was it?
I started with junior high wrestling in our phys ed classes. I kind of liked it and did okay, so I went out for junior high wrestling, 8th and 9th grade. I didn't start running track, though, till I was a junior in high school. I kind of already started to be an accomplished wrestler. Not great, but accomplished. But I started running track as a junior. Those were my two sports up through high school.
As a wrestler, how was competition for you? And that's another sport like track where it's an individual performance, but it's a team sport, team scoring. So how was that experience for you, being part of a team and an individual performer in wrestling?
Being part of a team, it meant that we practiced together. We, of course, had to pair up and practice with other wrestlers of similar weight class, sometimes a little bit higher, but we practiced hard. One of my strengths was my endurance, even in practice and in many of my matches. I could outlast. Maybe the first period we'd be pretty even, but by the time we got into the second period, I'd start to take control, and third period, the other person was gassed out, and I was still going. I knew I had the lung capacity for endurance, even through those days of wrestling. I didn't have a lot of strength, but I had the agility, I had the balance. I was able to compensate for not being a big, strong, husky guy with my endurance and my moves.
Well, wrestling is even more in the spotlight than a track event or cross country where there's a mass of people. There's two of you out there, and at the end, you're standing there. One of you, your arm's going to go. So how did it feel? What was the difference in feeling of my arms going up or the other guy's arms going up? What did you feel in those moments of handling success or maybe not success?
Of course, by that time, my arms were really tired, so raising the arm was pretty hard. But no, I felt good always whenever I get my hand raised. And then, of course, coming off the mat, getting ready to go from our next wrestler going out on the team who was after me, and giving them some encouragement. And then, of course, watching the rest of the matches, since I was in the middleweights. So I had to wait like for 5 or 6 matches before I would come up, and then had 5 or 6 more matches after me. It was a good time. We had a lot of fun, sometimes in practices. Of course, practices were pretty challenging with a lot of sweating, a lot of exertion, but I really enjoyed the matches. And like I said, coming out on top was always a good thing. There was a few times, especially when I got to be senior, that I lost a few that I didn't do my best. I knew that. That felt kind of dejected, kind of upsetting, especially when I thought I should have been able to beat that other person.
Nice. Well, by then in your senior year, you had added track. What was the spark or instigation to get you to first run track?
It's hard to say. Back in the 70s, early 70s, there was a guy by the name of Dr. Kenneth Cooper had written a book about aerobics. And my dad had gotten on a kick, and part of that aerobics was to see how fast you could run 2 miles or how far you could run in 12 minutes. I forget which one it was, but we actually had made a circle path out around a field on my grandfather's farm. We did some running even before I got into track. And I don't know really why I didn't get out for track earlier, but junior year after wrestling was over, and I said to my dad, I want to go out for track. And he said, well, okay, if you want to give it a try, go ahead. We started early March when the weather wasn't all that good. And our track coach was our head football coach. And of course, all his football players were to be out for track as well. We always started off with about 10 to 15 minutes of running around in the gym. We had to warm up that way. I would get started, and the further I would go, the faster I would run. Everybody else is plodding along, waiting how much more time. But like I said, the further we went, my legs were stretching out and taking turns and just flying around the gym. Coach said to me one day, are you going to run a 3-mile for us? You know as well as I do, the longest track event was a 2-mile. And I had no idea. I said, sure, Coach, whatever you want me to do. That got me to realizing that I like to run. I really knew that I liked to run at that point. Even before I got to my first track event or track meet, I enjoyed that.
What kind of facilities do you have? The high school is in Western Pennsylvania, little kind of a
Yeah.
rural community. What facilities do you have? What equipment did you get?
Well, we did get a pair of shoes, but they weren't really running shoes. Of course, I didn't know any better. I took whatever coach gave me to run in. Our track was a cinder track, and it was in town, and the high school was a couple miles out of town. After school, we would have to be bused into town, and from where we got dropped off, we had to walk about a mile to three-quarters of a mile to get to the track. Then we would start our practice once we got up to the cinder track. Now, once again, that was once we got outside. We started off like for 2 to 3 weeks, we're inside in the gym, and we also ran outside not so much in the parking lot, but we had a grassy field area where the football team had practiced. There was a hill there that the football team always had to run up this hill whenever they did something stupid. That was also part of our track workouts, running up and down that hills. We had some small trees that were planted around that practice field. And some of them got pretty well fertilized by the guys who were throwing up after running some of those wind sprints. Uh, I handled it okay. That didn't seem to bother me as much, but it was kind of funny that there were some guys, they pushed themselves hard enough that they were throwing up after practice. That didn't deter them. They knew that was making them better. That's what they wanted to do. And that was part of the inspiration as well, seeing how hard all these other guys who'd been out for track for a couple of years, how hard they were working to make themselves better. That pushed me to, I want to work hard. I want to be better too.
Where did you fit in terms of skill level right at the beginning? You had a football coach as your track coach. Did he know how to coach distance running, and where were you? Were there other distance runners more accomplished than you then?
He was a sprinter in high school. In fact, he was on a state championship 4x220-yard relay team whenever he'd been in high school. His track coach had also been a cross-country coach. So he kind of went by what his track coach had done for their guys when he had been in high school. I never had cross-country in high school. We did not have a team. So track was my running sport. Once we got to the track, my practices, since he realized I was going to be a distance runner, I would maybe run a mile per time, then a half mile per time after a break, give me a break. And it wasn't even like when we did intervals in college, it wasn't like, okay, you get a 2-minute break or a 3-minute break. It was just, all right, go walk around the track for a little while. I'll call you back when I'm ready for you. Sometimes it was 2 half miles, just different things that he would make me run hard. Warm up was only a half mile at a time. I never did any road work. He didn't know anything really about that. Never had any real distance base, just running around the track for times during practices. And that was it. It was when I finally started to run some meets. That's where I got my best workouts, when I ran meets.
What was your level of accomplishment in wrestling and high school track then? Did track supersede wrestling? Which one were you better at?
Track became my best event. I mean, I really liked wrestling and I worked hard at that. But the best I did was I got second in our sectional tournament my senior year. If I'd have won that one, I would have gone to districts. And I had a record of like 14-4 my senior year.
What was your weight class by your senior year?
I was 132 my senior year, 126 my junior year. I would have wrestled with your classmates, not Lynn Price, the older brother. Scott Price?
Scott was in my
Yes.
age, exactly, yeah. He had a younger brother, Lynn.
And Lynn wrestled against my younger brother. They had some pretty terrific matches against each other. I won't tell you how the match turned out with Scott.
He was a pretty good guy, yeah. So what happened in your junior year and then your senior year in track? How did you progress and what were your accomplishments?
My first track meet was a dual meet at Salzburg. Coach had me run in the 2-mile relay, and I forget what I did in that. Then I ran the mile, and I remember basically running with the lead runner from Salzburg till the last lap. And then I just took off, easily won that. Then I ran the half mile, similar circumstances. Coach told me my times, and I didn't know what was really good at that time, but I was under 5 minutes. So I began to think, okay, that's the standard. You got to get under 5 minutes. But I ran pretty consistently 450s down into 440s. Our county track meet, Indiana County Track Meet, was held at IUP. And I won it that year. My junior year, I won it with a 4:39.5. And that was my best time to that point. All districts, I can't remember what I placed, so I didn't get to states my junior year. But my senior year, then I did hit under 440 2 times, and I took second at the district championships to a fellow from, I can't remember if it was Chief Logan or Kish. I've been trying to think of his name, and I can't remember it offhand.
Was it Rob Pontius?
Oh, Pontius. Yes, that's who it was. I'm sorry, Pontius. But I had shin splints really bad my senior year. When I wasn't running, it was hard to walk. During the school day, I would put icy hot on my shins, wrap them with ace bandages, and walk around smelling like Ben Gay all day. It oozed down into my shoes and into my socks. And back then, we really didn't know what to do. But one of the other coaches from another school taped my legs before districts. He taped up the front like it needed to be done. It could be healed. With that other coach taping up my legs, it did help me, and I ended up getting second at districts using my normal strategy, which was to just run close to the front or right behind the front or lead until the last lap, and then I took off and sprinted the last lap. But Pontius was out ahead of me by that point, and there was no catching him. And that was where I ran one of my sub 440 times. I think that was a 434 that day. I ran a 434. That was my fastest mile time ever in high school. I did get to states, but once again, that was not a fun experience for me at states.
Why was it not fun? That was probably at Beaver Stadium at that point?
That was at Beaver Stadium, Penn State Beaver Stadium, exactly. And it had rained before that. You've heard of the waterfall start? Well, I tell people that it was named for me because we had 2 heats and you had to qualify to get to the finals. I was clearing the outer edge on the waterfall start. And the shoes I was wearing were actually, I found out, were discus thrower shoes. They were smooth on the bottom.
Right.
I didn't have pin spikes. I had long spikes for cinder track. So I wore those smooth shoes. Denny Noonan was a starter. Denny called us up to the line. He fired the gun. I pushed off on those smooth shoes on the wet track, and I went right down on my face.
Wow.
Now, there was no recall because there was no jostling or anything like that. I just fell straight to my face. I got up. Everybody else was going out around the bend. And so I ran like crazy to try to catch up to the group and kind of burned myself out just trying to do that. So I did not have a good finish. When I was all done, went to talk to Coach. My head was hanging, and I asked him what my time was, and he said, "You don't want to know. Don't worry about it." I knew I didn't qualify for the finals. I was just glad I did get to states. It was fun to be there and just a really different experience for me. My first time on a real all-weather track. We ran at IUP for our county meet, and it was the asphalt track. It was all-weather, but it wasn't the all-weather track that we have today.
You had run races at IUP, so the coaches at IUP had a look at you. How did you end up attending IUP?
I grew up just down the road, Blairsville. Of course, local newspaper. I was able to keep track of some of the IUP track and field, cross country, and some of the names. I really never got recruited by anybody except Doc Sutton, Lou Sutton. He came to the school a couple times. The first time he came to see me, I had already applied for early admission to IUP. The second time he came, I was already in. I already been accepted. So he really didn't have to do much to recruit. And I really didn't look at any other schools since that was close. I didn't want to go far from home. I guess I was strange. I wanted to be close to home. In fact, I was a commuter student throughout my years at IUP, driving back and forth from home to IUP for practices, for classes, and all that. I was interested in going there. I'll add this. I already knew names like Danny Friedrich, Kim Burke from reading the newspapers. I remember that IUP hosted an invitational track meet. We didn't run in it from Blairsville, but I remember that Don Friedline was the one name that he won the mile. I thought that was interesting. When I saw his time, I thought, wow, he's pretty fast. And, but I remembered that when I got to IUP, then I said, oh, yeah, I remember that name, Don Friedline from Kiski, pretty good miler.
That's right. IUP's right down the road. You're familiar with the running program. They're fairly successful. And you know what cross country is, so you didn't wait for track. Did you joined the cross country team immediately your freshman year?
Yes, I went right into cross country. Our first practice was to meet Dr. Sutton at the donut shop and go out for a 4-mile run. That was my longest run I'd ever run at one time up to that point.
Oh, my God.
I'd never run that far at one time because I never had anybody train me like that. It was a nice, easy, slow run. It was Dr. Sutton, myself, and some of the other freshmen. That got me started on morning runs, and then, of course, the afternoon runs. Of course, going from no running at all over the summer to all of a sudden running 2 times a day, 4 miles in the morning and 8 to 10 miles in the afternoon. I was able to keep up with it, but it was tiring. It was tiring, but I'm glad I did it. I'm really glad I stuck with that.
Did you do the morning runs with anybody?
Yeah.
So you commuted in, did the morning run, stayed for practice,
Yes.
and then commuted home. Wow.
Yeah. That was my day. I got in early for the morning runs, usually at 6 o'clock. Then I would pay for breakfast at the dining hall, go to classes, throughout the day, if I had any breaks, maybe go hang out at the student union or the cross country house, then practice at 4 o'clock. And then that first year, I wasn't working at the intramurals, but after that, I started working intramurals. So sometimes I was working till 10 o'clock at night with intramural sports before I would drive home.
So how did your fitness take to all that long distance mileage, and where were you on the freshman team? Cross country.
My freshman cross country team, I did not let her. I was like 28th man that year.
Wow.
By the end of the season. But the good thing for me was we did a time trial within the team, all 35 of us or whatever. We went out on the road. We ran like a 5-mile time trial, and I hit like 30 minutes for that time trial. And that was early in the season. By the end of the season, I had run mid 27s, 27:30 something maybe for 5-mile cross country race. So I was real pleased with my progress to that point, having got my times under 28 minutes by the end of the season. And then I started to run.
You came into there as a half miler and a miler, and then you started running the 5 miles and sometimes longer cross country. What was your freshman track season like?
Well, freshman track season, I trained with the long distance runners. I was kind of focusing on mile 5K races until we ran the district, I think it was District 18 NAIA.
Yeah.
We were getting close to that meet. Before that, though, it was early spring, like March. We had a meet down in Fairmont. I wasn't scheduled to go, and then somebody else couldn't go. The one who couldn't go was Donnie Friedline. So coach said, "You're going to run, but your name's Don Friedline when you get up there." So I got to run on an all-weather track down in Fairmont, West Virginia, and that was my first time that I ever hit like in a 420s, and I ran like a 422 or 423 mile. And I was pretty excited about that I dropped my times that quickly, that fast in my freshman year. I was starting to talk about the district track meet. Coach said, "Do you want to run a steeplechase?" And I just said, "Sure, whatever you think I can do that." So we practiced some barriers, and I got to run the steeplechase, and I think I finished 6th. After that race, I was pretty happy. I got a place, and I said to coach, "Can I run out of states next weekend or whatever?" And they said, "Yeah, you sure are running out of states again." So I got hung on the steeplechase then from my freshman year on as my main event, although I did run some 5Ks and did run some more miles subsequent years. But my focus was to be ready for the steeplechase for championships.
So how was the learning the steeplechase skills, both barriers and water jump? It's a bit of a technical event.
Yes, of course, we could jump on the top of the barriers, but ideally you wanted to hurdle it. So we learned how to hurdle over the 36-inch hurdles first. That way, if you fell or banged on your knee or something like that, you didn't get hurt as bad. Also to develop technique, how to get the lead leg out front, how to swing the trail leg up along the side rather than drag it underneath you or behind you. So, there's a lot of trials and technique that way. And then we would practice with barriers on the track. We'd put the barriers out and run intervals over barriers, running for time that way. So there was some different ways we worked on that. And then when it came to the water jump, that was one where the technique that we learned to use was to approach the water jump. Since I led with my left leg usually, to jump up with my right leg on the top, push off with my right leg so I would land with my left as my lead leg and land in the water. And the goal was to have one foot wet and the next foot would be dry. And I was usually able to do that, which helped that get me out of the water as quick as possible and on into the next barrier. The hard thing about steeplechase barriers is there's usually getting over the barrier as smooth as you can, but even then there's that reacceleration between barriers because of the time that you're in the air getting over the barrier. So it's a strength race. It really takes a lot of strength to keep not only the spring in your legs to get over the barriers, but to keep up your speed between the barriers on that 7.5 lap race.
Now, the technique learning, you described a little bit and used the word we. Were you coached on that? Was that pure coaching? Was that trial and error?
Coach Fry usually leading us. Of course, Danny Friedrich had been a steeplechase runner before I was there, so Danny was helping me, coaching me on that some. And I think Kim Burke, if I remember right, he ran it some too. So I had several other guys who had already been steeplechase racers. They'd been through the process of learning techniques. They helped me learn the ropes on how to get over the barriers.
Well, let's talk accomplishments then. By the time your freshman spring had arrived, you really made some dramatic improvements in time. You found an event that was almost a niche event, one that scared a lot of people, and you're having success there. What was your best successes in university cross country and in track?
I need to throw in here that after that freshman track season, I was inspired by Tom McGuire. We called him Squires. That previous fall, 74, when I was a freshman, Tom was a senior. He had run 1,500 or 1,600 miles in training to prepare for that cross-country season in the fall of 74. I remember reading about that in the paper, how much he ran and how he got himself ready for a good cross-country season, and he was our number one guy. My summer, between my freshman and sophomore year, I dedicated myself to following the training program that I had learned from Coach Fry of running morning, short day runs in the morning, long runs in the afternoon, and doing intervals a couple times a week. And I designed my own program based on what I'd learned from him, doing longer intervals on a Monday and shorter intervals on a Wednesday, and running 10 miles combined on interval days and then long distance days in between. I hit 1,200 miles that summer of training, and that was all on my own. Well, my dad ran with me in the mornings oftentimes. He'd run 4 with me in the morning. My intervals, since I was preparing for cross country, I did them around one of our hay fields. I had a path around the hay field, and I had used my motorcycle to mark off like how far it was one loop around there. So I knew how far was a mile, how far was a half mile. But most of my intervals were like Coach Fry had done, 5-minute runs, 4-minute runs, 3-minute runs, that type of thing, where most of my intervals were just patterned after the different things he'd given us to do. So when I came into cross-country season my sophomore year, I had a pretty good base. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I started off that season. My times were faster than what I had finished my previous season. It was kind of neat. My first race was at that park. Nobody knew what I was going to do, how I might do, but I knew guys like Danny Friedrich and Kim Burke. I knew they were pretty good runners. So we were running our 5-mile home course at Mack Park. I was feeling pretty good. I knew I was running well, and we were getting close in the last mile heading toward the horse track toward the finish. And I remember Danny Friedrich and maybe it was Bob Costello was running with Freddie at that time. Anyway, one of them turned around and looked back to see who was behind him. They saw it was me. They said, it's Kunks. They looked at each other and said, what the hell's he doing here?
He was 35th last year. Yeah.
Yeah, right. He was like our 35th man last year. They finished ahead of me, but I wasn't too far behind him once we got on the track and got to the finish line. But that was pretty exciting, being in the top 5 right away my sophomore year.
Did you pay attention to your own training shoes at that point? What were you training with in the summer?
Yeah, that's when I started to get a decent pair of shoes. I wore the old Adidas Countries. They were like a leather shoe, white with the 3 green stripes on them and a rubber sole. That was my training shoe all summer, I believe. Those were heavy too.
And how did that season go then? Basically in the top handful of people in the first race, and how did that season work out?
Yeah, I was in top 5, top 7 all season. There was a couple times early on in the season I was number 1 man. In fact, California Invitational, like the second or third race of the season, I think I was number 1 man that year. Then other guys caught up to me or whatever, but I didn't have any really outstanding performances I can remember, like top finishes of a big meet and invitational. I was really engaged with the team aspect of it, that we finished together, close together as a pack, running together with others, finishing close to one another with a small gap between us. It wasn't so much about my place for personal accomplishment, but my place that I would help the team as much as I could. And that was pretty much all through my cross-country years. I never did make like a top 5 at states or anything like that, but it was the team accomplishments that I was always looking forward to.
And what was the best team accomplishment while you were there for you in cross-country?
Our senior year, as Dick Wolf had mentioned, we placed at NAIAs and NCAAs. We were 3rd at NCAAs. I thought we were 4th at NAIA. I got a plaque for it. I can't remember, but
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't run the NCAA meet that year because I had an injury. I'd picked my mileage up in preparation for the state meet, and I developed a little twinge, a little slight muscle pull in my calf. And I missed the state meet, and I didn't run the NCAA meet, but I ran the NAI meet at the end of the season. That was our last meet of the year. That was my junior year. We would run at Wisconsin NAIA. And I remember halfway through the meet, there were 5 of us side by side.
Wow.
We talk about pack running. We were across the course about halfway through, all 5 of us. So we finished pretty close to one another.
Even the nature of big meets now is a lot more with social media, with technology and everything. How was the experience of running nationals? Did it seem like a bigger venue besides what was on the line and at stake? Or did it feel just like a bigger version of a cross-country race?
So I ran nationals. We actually ran out in California my sophomore year. We traveled to the state of California nationals that year, and I did really well. I was in the top 40. I forget. I was somewhere in the 30s. I finished that season at nationals. It was a flat course, but they were big meets. We had some outstanding competition. In fact, when we ran California, we had names like Steve Scott and Ralph Cerna. I'm trying to remember the third guy's name, but they finished 1, 2, 3.
Holding hands coming across.
Steve Scott was a world-class miler.
American record holder at one point, I think.
Yes.
But let's talk about the competition in Western Pennsylvania, because there were also other teams in the Pennsylvania nearby arena that were national caliber.
Edinburgh. Edinburgh was the one team that we couldn't beat. They had some super fast runners. Jeff Foster, Kevin Foley, Mark Muggleton, Dalvin Baylor, Henry Winger. I know there's other names I'm missing there, but those guys were great. There was a couple times I managed to run with some of them, but I couldn't do it consistently. I think it was my junior year out at Malone College. It was a fairly flat course, and the first mile, I was like way back in the pack. And I thought, oh man, this is terrible. But I kept picking up and gaining and gaining and gaining. And when we got down to the last mile of the race and into the last half mile, I'd worked my way up to 4th place. And the only people ahead of me were 2 Edinburghs and Danny Friedrich. Were the only ones ahead of me at that point. So I ended up finishing with a sub 25-minute 5-mile cross country that day, which was one of my best 5-mile races.
Yeah, it was a good course. Edinburgh and those superstars, you'd run into them a couple times a year at big meets like Malone. They were in the Pennsylvania College Conference. So that was a very successful, several meets, several team events at nationals, some very good individual performances, some great team performances. How did your track performances go then? And were you able to stay healthy through track seasons?
Yeah. My freshman year, I did develop some shin splints, but with the trainers that we had there, of course, changing and getting better pair of shoes, I didn't have any trouble with that the rest of the time, my years in college. My sophomore year, I ended up at states 3rd in the steeplechase. My junior year, 2nd, and my senior year, I won the state championship for the steeplechase at PSACs. I went to nationals. I did qualify for nationals all 3 of those years. My senior year at NCAAs out in Illinois was probably my best performance. I made it to the finals. I went out a little too hard the first couple laps in the finals and the steeplechase there, and I missed out making All-American in track. So I never made All-American in college, never made it in cross-country or in track.
You did as a team member.
Yes, as our cross-country teams, we did make All-American awards, NCAAs and NAIAs.
Honestly, Dan, you had this ridiculous schedule. Some of us would look back on, I know we go through points in our life, say, I don't know how I did it, but I don't know how you did it. So the early mornings, the all day, working till late at night. And how was the academics at IUP fitting that in with your athletic career too?
I was a biology major. Being a science major meant that you had labs, and oftentimes they were 3 to 4 hour labs, and they were always in the afternoon. Every semester, I usually had 1 day a week. I was not able to practice with the team. I had to go do it on my own because I had to stay for my labs and I had to finish those. There were days I remember everybody else was on their way back from the golf course in cross-country season from practicing. Yes. I'd be on my way out to the golf course asking coach, all right, what's the workout, coach? Then I ended up doing the workout by myself some of those days because of the labs. But Academics, I did okay with that. Didn't make the dean's list till my senior year, but I got mostly B's through my sciences and general ed classes and stuff like that. I couldn't keep up with all the reading though. I had trouble staying awake to do all the reading. I would take notes and of course study over my notes for tests and so forth. I mean, it was a challenge, and I probably could have done better if I knew better now how to study like I do now, how to study for some of those tests and exams. It didn't hold me back from anything. My grades were good enough to help me move on to my career in teaching.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good way to finish with a state championship in your final season, your senior year. That must have been a good cherry on top of all the work and career there. You had run 5-milers, 10Ks in college. Were you running road races there in the summers?
Not really very much. Once or twice. I remember going to a 10K, 20K race out in Akron, Ohio with Kim Burke and my dad and a couple other guys. I ran the 10K with Benny and some of the others. Bill Rogers and Frank Shorter were both there. When the race was over and we'd run, Benny said, "Hey, Rogers and Shorter are going out for a cool down. They're going to run the course again. Let's go with them." I said, okay. Well, we started the cool down with them, but I swear we ran the cool down almost as fast as we ran the race. I mean, those guys were just talking and gabbing the whole way going along. I know I was struggling just to keep them in sight on that cool down.
After university, then, you did do some road racing and increase your distance. So what was the transition there? What did you do? Did you take any time off, or did you go right into the longer races and road racing right away?
I really didn't run a whole lot right away, but I did get myself up for it. I ran Johnstown Marathon, was my first real marathon. Most of the time it was 10Ks back then. There wasn't very many 5Ks. It was 10Ks. So I did run 10Ks whenever I could find one. But I ran Johnstown Marathon my first time, and I ran like a 2:34. That was in the beginning of October. Then December, I ran another marathon and ran like a 2:32. And I can't remember if that was 78 or 79. So the next year, I decided I'm going to run Johnstown again. So I ran it again, and this time I've got under 2:30. I was never over 2:30 again after that. My times kept decreasing from that point on, and I kept training harder and training more. And I was training by myself for the most part. Every once in a while, I would drive up to IUP and run intervals with the cross-country team, possibly to help get me in shape a little better. But my goal, and I think all of our goals at that time when we started running marathons, we wanted to qualify for the Olympic trials. Of course, I didn't make it for 80 trials, but 1983, I really picked up my mileage and increased my training and focused on preparation to run a qualifier. And the qualifying time was 2:19:04 to get to the trials. So I focused on the Columbus Marathon in 1983, and I was able to run a 2:18:54.
10 seconds.
Yeah. So I qualified for the Olympic trials in 1983. That was in October. The trials weren't till spring, so I was able to run the trials in 1984.
This whole time you're self-coaching?
Yes. I read a lot from like how other people were training, like distance runs and varying their length and how much rest time. I taught at Blairsville High School, which was 17 miles away from my house. There was a couple times where I set everything up so I'd have my lunch and have my clothes at school, and I would run to school in the morning, shower, change, teach all day, then change my clothes and run home. That's 17 miles. So I had like a 34-mile day.
I don't know. I've only run one marathon in my life. I'm not a marathoner. This is just insane. This sounds like people talking about, we had to run to school through our bad shoes and run through the snow. That's insane. Let's talk about your Olympic trials experience. It was quite an amazing weather day. Who else did you know that was competing there, and what was your experience at the trials?
Donnie Friedline was with us there. Donnie and I were both together for the Olympic trials. Spent the night before that together. We stayed at dorms at one of the Buffalo colleges. Whenever I drove in, my wife and I drove into Buffalo, we asked some people, "Where's the college at for the marathon?" Nobody knew what we were talking about. So we finally found it. We got registered at the college and got our dorm rooms. The marathon was the next day. It was a hot day. It was very hot, very humid. The course was traditionally the Skylon Marathon, which ran about 4 miles in Buffalo, crossed the Peace Bridge, and made a 2-mile loop around the fort on the other side in Canada, and then ran parallel to the Niagara River toward the falls for the rest of the race, except for one little dog leg that ran up away from the river and then back toward the river again, and then finished going downhill to Niagara Falls. Once we got over the Peace Bridge and around that loop to about 6 miles, 20 miles to go, Donnie and I were together. And it was very hot, so I was pacing myself. I didn't want to go too hard because I didn't want to die at the end. I knew I wasn't going to qualify for the Olympics. I just wanted to have a reasonable performance. But Donnie said, you know what, I'm going to push it. I feel pretty good. I said, well, go ahead. It's pretty humid out there. Well, he did push a little harder, and he got out ahead of me. And as the race wore on, of course, it was brutal with the heat and humidity. But we got within, the half mile, and I could see Donnie up ahead of me. I was starting to catch up to him. He ended up finishing ahead of me by like 10 seconds or so. We weren't too far apart in finishing that race, and I don't remember the exact time on that one. It wasn't anything outstanding. It was a good experience simply for the fact of being around all those top national runners all together in one course. But I do have to say that a lot of the guys dropped out ahead of us because they knew that they weren't going to qualify, and they probably had another race a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later that was a payday for them. So they were going to save themselves for their money race later on. We finished, I think, 49th and 50th or 50th and 51 out of 212 qualifiers that day.
Nice. Were you ever sponsored? Did you ever run for money or get sponsorship?
I did have some sponsorship with Etonic for a while. I did get that prior to the trials. They helped pay for some of my mileage and travel and shoes and some things like that. I never really received money for that. The only money I ever got was the Pittsburgh Marathon the first year they ran it. I finished fourth, and was it fourth? I was X-1. I was the next to last person to get money. That $400. It was $400 I won in that.
That purse has probably moved up in a few decades, but that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
What did you do with your running career after the trials?
Before the Olympic trials that September, I ran a great race in Pittsburgh of 10K, and I ran a 29:26. That was my fastest 10K ever, and that was an amazing race. It just felt so good the whole way.
Yeah.
And it was very smooth. I didn't go like out hard and die. I strong the whole way. It was a great feeling to run that quick, that fast, and to finish that well in that race. After the marathons, I kept running, ran a few more marathons after that, but somewhere around 1986, well, it was 85, 86, I developed a problem in my ankle, and it was sore. I could run. I would take some time off, felt okay. I would run again, and it would get sore again. And nobody could figure out what it was. It took a couple years till finally one doctor said, oh, yeah, you broke your navicular bone, where the tendon joins. And that's like right inside, underneath where that bone protrudes out on the inside of your ankle. It was right below that. So I ended up getting surgery. They pulled that tendon out, cut out that piece of bone, and reinserted the tendon, drilled a hole and reinserted the tendon, and then put a cast on it to heal and reform around that bone. And it actually took a couple years for it to fully heal. But I resumed my running, but I never really got back into the high mileage, maybe 60, 65 miles a week through my 30s, into my 40s. But I kept running road races just for fun. And they were competitive. I enjoyed being in my 40s and still running hard against the kids that were in teens and college that were trying to get better.
Half your age. So what happened then with your career phase of being a coach and mentor to other runners?
After I had that surgery on my foot, I finally got things together, and I started the cross-country team at Blairsville. We started as a club the first year. My youngest brother was able to run as a sophomore, and I had 2 or 3 other guys. And so one boy had run marathons with his dad. So I had some kids with some distance background. So we started a cross-country team. The next season, then it got officially recognized. We started to have some pretty good success right off the bat. By mid-90s, I had started qualifying some of those kids for states. It was in 93. I had one gentleman, one of my young boys I was coaching, finished in the top 10 at states. So, yeah, I ended up getting state qualifiers and state place winners for 7 years in a row there. Wow. Some of them were multiple state qualifiers and state medalists. One kid was 4-time top 10 states. Never won it. He got third his senior year. But
wow, what was his name?
Curtis Hauser.
Some of those kids may track this podcast down, hear about Coach Cunkleman.
Yeah.
In your coaching preparation, you had done a lot of self-coaching, worked with a lot of people on a team. How much did you adapt and learn about running as a coach? You'd done a lot of running, a lot of distances, a lot of years. What did you need to learn to be a good coach?
I knew right away that I wasn't going to expect them to do 15-mile days like I had done, and they were only running 5K races. We adapted back, and I always started the season off with, just a 4-mile run, especially some of the people who'd never run before, just to get them started. One of the things that I always felt good about was some of those kids would struggle that first run that they did 4 miles. They wanted to quit, and I would always tell them, listen, give us 2 to 3 weeks. I said, by the end of that 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to start to feel better. I said, the first week, by the end of the week, you're going to feel like you never want to do it again. Next week, you're going to feel good at the beginning of the week after have a couple days off. And by the end of the second week, you're going to feel like dirt again. By the end of the third week, you're going to feel a lot better. From that point on, you're going to be asking me, can we just run that 4-mile run again? That's what happened. That once they got acclimated to running 4, 5, 6 miles. And as the season went along, I would stretch out their long runs. Usually the longest I would have them do would be an 8-mile run at any one time. And of course, I was coached on intervals. And so I would work them into interval workouts, and I would start with shorter ones first, and I'd build them up a little bit longer as the season went along and the type of intervals. Part of it was being with them, running with them, inspiring them to work hard at it. They adapted well. I always seemed like the kids got along. They knew they were working hard, but I always let them have fun when they weren't working hard. I let them goof off. I knew that long distance runners are a little bit goofy and crazy anyway when I was in college. You taught me that too, Matt, by the way. So I let my kids goof once in a while. They appreciated that.
That's great. What about setting expectations and handling disappointments? You're a competitive athlete for years and years. How did you handle setting expectations and coaching these kids to be competitors and handling the results?
Typically, cross-country season in high school, we had dual meets. So we get to know some of the other kids that we were running against. I would have the kids measure yourself against those same athletes, the same ones that you either beat or that you finished right behind. That would be the goal, to beat that next person. The next time you would meet them, you would want to finish ahead of them. So we would set goals like that to know who we were running against and then who we could compete against. Now, some of the kids I had, like Curtis Hauser, Lance Yurt, Justin Renwick, Dave Eldridge, to name a few, just good competitors right in the front from the very beginning. So they always ran hard and everybody else had to chase them. But I always had the team concept. 5th, 6th, 7th man, to me, were vitally important. So it was important that they learn how to race because they're the ones that brought up the score. I always made a point of the 5th man. I always made a point of the 5th man. I said, you're the one that won it for us. You're the one that plays that scored high enough that we were able to keep our point total down and beat the other teams. That was always important that those guys know how important they were for the whole team. And the whole team grasped that too. They understood that it was not just an individual accomplishments. If we wanted to do good as a team, everybody had to do good in each race. And that was an important part for me, building that team aspect and bringing the guys together to work together, to practice together, and to have fun together.
Was the sport in transition by the time you started coaching? I mean, obviously, back in the 70s, there were not very many choices of shoes even, and you're running in maybe running shoes. And by the time you reached the late 80s and 90s as a coach, had you seen the sport change over those decades?
Shoes definitely changed and got better. And it was always one of the things that I would tell my high school kids, don't skimp on shoes. If you want to be a good runner, you've got to have some good shoes that's going to make your legs feel better. It's going to help prevent injuries. You've got to have good shoes. You've got to spend a little bit and get good shoes. So I always made an emphasis on that. And shoes did improve over those years, especially from the 70s when some of the shoes we had, they were like $20 for the Tiger Cortez, and we had to use shoe goo to keep building them up because they would wear out real fast. That was an important part of having the kids ready. The other big thing that I noticed, collegiately in particular, was when we were in college, we had dual meets, which were very important to me because that was, as a freshman especially, that was my opportunity to run. If it would just been invitationals and championships, I probably wouldn't have got to run as often. But college nowadays is almost all invitationals. There's hardly anything that's a dual meet. For me, that was important even in my high school coaching, to coach those kids for dual meets, that we were preparing for the big meets at the end of the season through running those dual meets. That was always seemed effective for me, and it worked well with the kids. I would taper them off too. I would make sure that they were not overworking too much during the season, so that when we got to the end of the season, they were burned out. All part of the things I learned is from running cross country at IUP and in training myself.
Now, how long was your high school coaching career?
We started in 1987. I think my last year was 2015. So yeah, it spanned
Wow.
like over 25 years, almost 30 years. Yeah.
That's great. You've mentioned a lot of people, and one of the people you mentioned is somebody the running community just lost, is Don Bushy Friedline. You've raced with him, you roomed with him, you were a teammate with him. What are your memories of Donnie Friedline?
I mean, a good all-around guy, a great competitor. Has been pointed out, All-American in the 4x4 relay. He ran a sub-50 quarter mile, and he ran like a 2:15 marathon. He could train for anything and do well in just about any race that he wanted to run. It was just fun to be around, and a good hard worker all the time.
You had a good career. Of course, it comes with setting expectations. There's going to be things that don't go perfectly well. Your disappointment at nationals of the strategy you used didn't quite work out. Looking back, are you completely satisfied? Is there any other things you wonder about, or say, wow, if it would have been a different time, I might have gone a different direction or tried some other events or everything? Or it sounds like a very successful and satisfying career the whole way for you.
It's been like 99% satisfying. The only thing I would maybe do over would be go out for track my freshman year in high school instead of waiting until my junior year, but who knows? I don't regret anything else about it. I mean, I'm glad I went to IUP, ran everything that I ran there, did everything that I did with that, the running that I did afterwards, the coaching, and even now I'm still very active as a track and field official in high school and in the collegiate level.
You're obviously following the sport still and officiating. I've been a USA official softball umpire. What activities as official do you enjoy most?
I'm primarily a clerk of course for meets where I officiate. For some of the high school events locally, I serve as a meet director for our county meet and sometimes referee for some of our invitationals. And for dual meets, I can be anything from a starter to running a field event or whatever needs to be done for those meets. I'm actually getting ready to leave tomorrow for Bucknell University for the Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference, PSAC they call it now, Indoor Track and Field Championships. I'll be going up there to work as a clerk of course for my, I don't know, maybe it's been 12 years now, maybe 10 or 12 years. I've been doing that consecutively, and I've been the clerk of course at PSAC for 30 years, outdoors, the Outdoor Track and Field Championships. So those are my favorite meets, the PSAC championship meets. Good competition, the coaches, the athletes themselves, working with them and helping them be prepared that they can do their best, that I stay out of their way, but I make sure that they're in the right place, the right time, and without being a cheerleader. Just giving them a good word, encouraging them to have a good meet.
That's all great. Did anything almost go very wrong at any of these meets over the years?
Oh, yeah. I mean, almost every year there's something that comes up that you wish you would have done different or could have done different. Sometimes it was preventable. Sometimes it wasn't preventable. It's just because the athletes did something they weren't supposed to do and you had to make a call. But most of the time it's been pretty good. There's been a few of those judgment calls or issues that come up, but I think we've always handled them pretty good. Even though may not be satisfied with the end result, we were able to work through them and at least come out with a reasonable conclusion in those cases.
You're obviously pretty well known in the Pennsylvania track and field and cross country circuit doing all this officiating. Do you see some of the old competitors that are in coaching roles or other officiating roles that you used to compete against?
Yes, not as much now because many of those guys have retired from coaching. Not too many of them got into officiating, but yeah, it used to be IUP reunions at some of the invitational cross-country meets especially. That was always fun to run into those guys, yell across a field at each other or something like that, call them, our old nicknames, those kind of things.
Well, this is a good reflection on those decades, and it's good to catch up with you and hear about all those accomplishments. We don't always remember what everybody else did, some we were witness to and celebrating at the time, but it's good to go through. Apart from that, what do you hope or think that you would like people to remember you when they say, hadn't seen you for a while, said Dan Cunkleman? Oh, yeah, what would you like them to remember about you?
That I enjoyed running, always got along with all my teammates, always worked hard to do my best and encourage others to do their best as well.
This chat we had, I think, is actually pretty inspiring, and I think it'll be inspiring to a lot of people to listen to. Certainly awe-inspiring to me. I didn't realize at the time some of the stuff that you were managing to put through in your daily life as an athlete. It's pretty impressive. It is very inspiring to hear all that, and it's a fun and warm time. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your time, and thanks for sharing all your stories, Dan.
All right, Matt. Yeah, good talking with you and catching up again, too. There's just still so many more stories that could be told because we went through a lot. We did a lot of good memories.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.